Before I start, I want to clarify two things. Firstly, this is the first in a series of two videos on a debate between philosophers on the extent by which mentally ill patients are morally responsible persons. In this video, I will give Edwards' account of moral responsibility, and in the next one, I will give other philosophical accounts that are different from Edwards. Know that just because this video is all about Edwards, I'm not asking you, the viewer, to favor his account over others. Secondly, given the topic, I thought it would be appropriate to start off with the peculiar story of Ethan Couch, who commits very morally questionable acts on the excuse of a mental illness known as affluenza. I will tell you this story since it is pertinent to the issues of moral responsibility, and then I will come back to it later after having heard from both sides of the philosophical debate on moral responsibility. As you listen to the story and its outcome, ask yourself, does Ethan Couch get what he deserves? Was Ethan Couch treated with justice? Now, without further ado, let's hear the story of Ethan Couch. Ethan Anthony Couch, at age 16, killed 4 people while driving under the influence on June 15, 2013, in Burleson, Texas. Couch was driving while intoxicated and under the influence of drugs, was driving on a restricted license, and was speeding in a residential area when he lost control of his vehicle, colliding with a group of people assisting another driver with a disabled sport utility vehicle. 4 people were killed in the collision, and a total of 9 people were injured. 2 passengers in Couch's pickup truck suffered serious injuries, with 1 passenger suffering from complete paralysis. Couch was indicted on 4 counts of intoxication, manslaughter, for recklessly driving under the influence. In December 2013, Judge Gene Hudson Boyd sentenced Couch to 10 years of probation, subsequently ordering him to undergo therapy for a long-term inpatient facility. Before sentencing, Couch's attorneys had argued that Couch had affluenza and needed rehabilitation instead of prison, arguing that Couch had no understanding of boundaries as his affluent parents had never given him any. Couch's sentence, judged by many as outrageously lenient, set off what the New York Times called an emotional, angry debate that has stretched far beyond the North Texas suburbs. Now, hold on to your answer to the question of whether or not Couch got what he deserved. We will return to this story later once we have visited a few perspectives on the question of the moral responsibility of mentally ill persons. Last time, you'll remember that I proposed 3 theories of dysfunction: Wakefield's etiological account of dysfunction, the propensity theory of dysfunction, and the Cummins theory of dysfunction. Notice how we can differentiate between our 2 dominant accounts of dysfunction, Wakefield's naturalistic account and Cummins' value-laden account, by their understanding of the normativity of mental illness. Wakefield, in an attempt to remove all arbitrariness from psychiatry, grounds his theory in science and biology and steers clear as much as possible from any notion of a socio-cultural determination of dysfunction on the basis of moral values. The Cummins theory of dysfunction, on the other hand, does the exact opposite, saying that it is what we human beings agree on that determines the proper functioning of certain mechanisms within their larger systems. This distinction is important because Craig Edwards would like to point out that no matter what background theory of dysfunction that you hold, there are necessarily ethical implications behind all mental illness diagnoses. If we ignore these implications and instead pretend that there are no value-laden ethical truths upon which we base our psychiatric decision-making on, we stand on shaky ground when we detain people with mental illnesses against their will, or provide forgiveness to criminals with mental illnesses. Edwards thinks that we first need to understand what we owe someone's moral personhood and what the ethical implications are of mental illness diagnosis before we can go and do any kind of philosophy of mental illness. In his paper titled Ethical Decisions in the Classification and Mental Conditions as Mental Illness, Edwards makes use of a Cummins theory of dysfunction that is deeply rooted in morality. He says that a condition is a mental illness if and only if it is a dysfunction of personhood, or in other words, if it undermines one's capacities for rationality or agency. Traits that either cause one to act contrary to their own interests or impair a person's ability to make competent and voluntary decisions signify when a person is eligible for taking on the sick role. The sick role makes a person a passive victim of their condition, thus removing moral responsibility for their condition. Depending on the situation, a sick person may not be responsible for having their condition or even for seeking their own treatment. Edwards tries to separate the ill from the evil by asking, do we think that the person ought to be held accountable for their actions? Can the person take the sick role and be absolved of some or all of their responsibility to seek treatment and correct their behaviors? Remember that Wakefield too tries to separate the ill from the evil, but in a very different manner. Wakefield bases the separation of problems in living and evil from mental illness on etiology. Since symptoms of problems of living are not sufficient to separate difference from dysfunction, Wakefield uses evolutionary explanations to distinguish between the ill and the evil. One should also note that Edwards admits that he cannot provide a simple calculus where one can just do the math and determine what is or is not a mental illness. Instead, one must think qualitatively to determine whether or not a person can seek their own treatment, and also they must judge if their environment is making it so that the person cannot even change even if they want to. Edwards might look at the story of Ethan Couch and explain that the reason why he was given a lenient sentence was because he was deemed eligible for the sick role and was therefore absolved of some of his responsibilities for his behavior. An Edwardian thinker might say that giving Couch the sick role was wrong because it compromised his ability to hold people accountable for moral values that need to be preserved. But another Edwardian thinker could argue that Couch properly qualifies for the sick role, since his upbringing was so deprived that he could not function as an independent moral agent with full autonomy and rationality. What do you think of Edwards' account of moral responsibility for mentally ill persons? Do his thoughts help you determine whether or not Ethan Couch was given his just desserts? If the answer to these questions is no, don't worry. In the next video, we will look at very different interpretations of Ethan Couch's actions and his ability to be a functioning moral person.